Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, your host for the next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Today is Thursday, July 19th, year of our Lord 2018. Very special guest joining me today, Franklin Horton, one of my favorite post-APOC genre authors, will be coming on shortly. He's with us right now. I'm just going to get through a quick couple of announcements. You can find us on Facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. Go to our fan page, CRN. You can find me there as well, Suzanne Sherman. Suzanne Sherman's The Wasatch Report. We have a free app available for the Android platform. When you go there and just click on our network, you can hear our shows on a radio co-loop, and we have some great ones. Anytime you put it on, you're going to hear something informative and entertaining. Jeff Johnson's show, The Paradigm Shift, The Bailey Report with the other founder of the network, Daniel Bailey. The two of them combined. Sometimes I even join in for the Renegade and the Rambler radio show. The Other Side with Justin and Mike, two high school teachers who have a unique perspective, and we welcome them to the network, like having them on. Mike Meharry from the 10th Amendment Center as well, with his podcast with Peter Schiff, with the Schiff Gold podcast. So you have the 10th Amendment Center and Schiff Gold, Brush Fires of Freedom, coming out of Tucson, Arizona, with Sean Hoffine, as well as my show here, the Wasatch Report. And I have a new one I just started. We have the debut of Case in Point, where I'm going to pick apart landmark Supreme Court cases. I'm going to match them up with the Constitution and how they apply and affect us today. Our debut guest was with Kevin Gutzman. You can get that downloadable on SoundCloud. Kevin Gutzman, the author of many books pertaining to the Constitution. He also has a new series of lectures coming out very soon on Liberty Classroom, and that's going to be about Thomas Jefferson. So we also have, again, and then tomorrow we will have another episode of Mark and Suzanne, Revolutionizing Radio. Really excited to have our good friend Mark Cresslins back. Also, by the way, Liberty Classroom, if you are a listener of Cerberus Radio Network, you can get a discount, $40 off from $89, $49 membership for a basic membership. That will be your fee. Go to the checkout, libertyclassroom.com. When you get to the shopping cart, hit CRN as your code. Franklin Horton, you have just released a new book from the Borrowed World series. Want to welcome you to the show. How are you today?
I'm great, Suzanne. I appreciate you having me on here.
You know, we've been talking about getting you on for a long time, and I'm sorry it took so long, but now the timing is just perfect because you have book 6 out, and we'll talk about that today. We also have a giveaway. So for those of you listening, at the end of this show, we will ask a question, and the first two to answer correctly, send me a private message and get me your information, and we will send you a copy of either one of the selection from Borrowed World or Locker 9. Franklin, what got you into writing a series like this?
Well, you know, I was always interested in writing, and I tried it early on back when you had to have an agent before you could get a publisher. And I never had any luck with that. And what changed was Amazon created this system maybe, 8 to 10 years ago where you could publish through them with no agent required. You just write your book, you upload it to Amazon, and you see what happens. And I had grown up in the country where we, kind of lived pretty basic outdoor life. We did a lot of camping. I was always into survival and all that. So when I decided I wanted to write and try under this new Amazon system, I thought, I'm going to write the kind of book I like to read. I'm going to write a book about survival. I'm going to write a book about, this type of post-apocalyptic thing, which I really enjoy reading. And that was the inspiration. The book itself, the character, the situation he was in was all based on things that I was going through in my life at the time. So it just seemed a really natural thing to pick up with what was going on in my life and write a story around it.
You know, you raised a few good points there. When you said you wanted to write a book, the type that you like to read, that's really what we decided to do when we started this network here at Cerberus Radio Network. I got so tired of hearing the same dribble all day long on every station on the mainstream media. It's just different talking heads saying the same thing. We thought, how can we do this? How can we do this better? How can we, first of all, give people the truth? How can we give them a different perspective and get them to rethink? So it's really great that you did pretty much along the same lines that we did. I want to do something the way I would enjoy. And I think what you're doing obviously is resonating because your books are wildly successful and you're very, very talented. Also, you mentioned before, you used to have an agent publisher. And what we're noticing now with technology, just like we're seeing with musicians, musical entertainers used to have an agent. They'd have to go get a deal with a record label. With this technology now, it enables so many more people to be self-reliant, which is so crucial. I'm a huge proponent of self-reliance, not having to depend on somebody else for a job or to have your material listened to or read. So this is a really great opportunity for any other aspiring authors out there to take advantage of the ability to start your own business, have your own opportunity to be heard and be successful like Franklin here is. And your lifestyle seems like it has played a lot in influencing you in the story we hear in your book, because the outdoors and being skilled in the outdoors is really something that the character Jim is having to utilize to get him home to his family. Without giving any spoilers, let's talk about this series, and we're going to get into how these books are not only informative but they're educational and entertaining as well. Let's give the premise of what happens to Jim and a group of people. And I think listeners will understand how this really can resonate with their own lifestyles.
Well, Jim is a guy who worked a job similar to what I was working at the time, and still I work at a state mental health agency. So I had to travel twice a month at the time I was writing this book to Richmond, Virginia, which was about 325 miles from my home. So, when you go on a work trip, you're not always with people you like. It's not the ideal crew that you would pick if you were on some, desperate mission. It's just the people you basically get stuck with. So I decided to write a book about a guy who was on a business trip. And there were so many books out at the time that were about EMPs, where the power just, goes black, that what I wanted to write about was a cascading systems failure, where you have something tiny that just mushrooms into a big mess and ends up shutting down other systems as it gains strength. So there's a terror attack. A guy gets stuck, can't get fuel because they hit the power grid, but they also hit fuel refineries. And what happens with that is the president puts an executive order in place saying people can't get fuel unless they're a first responder or the military. So he gets stuck on the road where he's at. And one of the big issues with this book was the guy had got to his hotel that night, chosen not to fill up his vehicle. He thought he would fill it up the next morning. So they end up starting the day with about a quarter tank of gas, which really shapes what happens to them. So he ends up in this survival situation with a group of folks that he doesn't necessarily like or agree with, and their lives are all at risk together. And it jumps back and forth with his experience trying to get home in this situation and to what his family is going through at home, because a lot of people talk to their spouse about being prepared and about how to, keep the home fires burning in a bad situation. But you're never sure if people are listening. You're never sure if they take you seriously. So besides being his story, it's also the family's story about them trying to make sure that they know how to survive and that they know where the generator hookups are and that they know where the survival food is and the spare magazines, and it's about their journey as well as his.
And he really he laid out a great plan for them. And what I liked about this too is sometimes these people that are very prepared come across to other family members or their friends or their coworkers as a little bit batty, and we see that across the spectrum here. First with how his coworkers view him. But fortunately, he's got a wife who's pretty much on board family members might not have seen the need for it, but they sure realize the benefit. And I would tell people when I try to encourage them to be prepared, and then they'll just say, well, I'll just come to your house. When you read books like this, you understand that these situations can happen to anybody. I'll give you an example. I live way up in the mountains. Anywhere I go, if I want to go down to the closest city, which can either be Evanston or Park City, for me can be 80 to 100 miles round trip. And yesterday I went to Park City, and I always check my gas before I go. And I had 3/4 of a tank, but there have been times when I've said, well, I'll just fuel up in Park City, just like Jim decided to do the day, the night before. I'll just fuel up tomorrow. Well, I get to Park City, and lo and behold, everything's closed because a brush fire in the vicinity caused all the power to go out. Now, it came back on pretty soon, and I had plenty of fuel, but the issue here is don't take stuff like that for granted. Fortunately, the weather was fine. It came back on soon, but what if you're in a situation where the weather is very harsh and you need that fuel to keep your engine going, to keep yourself warm, to maybe drive the extra miles like Jim and these people needed to do? This is something that can happen to anybody. The lesson here is always have your vehicle topped off, and then also have supplies to get home. Also, we don't understand how violent a situation can get. Think of it. If you don't think this is true, imagine when we see every holiday season, Christmas shoppers, and they have the Black Friday. And when these people are stomping all over each other for deals at Walmart, imagine what it's going to be like now when they want to get fuel or food so they can get home to their families. What do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And what you were talking about never knowing exactly what could happen as far as weather, that I see that every year when there's an ice storm and people are stranded on the highways. You may have to sit on the highway 8 hours waiting until the highway department opens the road back up. And if you don't have the fuel to sit there and idle for 8 hours, you're going to get really cold. And a big emphasis for me in these books was so many people think that this mindset of being prepared and being survival oriented is extreme, and they think it, belongs to people who are tin hatters or have a military special operations background or whatever. But, it's not that way. My books were written about average people. And that's one of the things that I think really distinguishes this series is this is not a Green Beret. This is not some guy who, is a bushcraft master. This is a guy who just knows a little bit about survival from growing up around the woods and in an outdoor setting. It's about a family who just has the basic knowledge and the basic mindset that they need to take care of themselves. And that's what gets them through these hard times.
And that's so true. You mentioned the bushcraft and the bushcrafters. You don't have to be able to make a friction fire out in the woods. Just being prepared. It's a great skill to have. I completely agree. But this guy was prepared. He had a pack. And as you mentioned, he was not military, because you read a lot of these books and you think, holy cow, I don't have night vision goggles. I don't know all this other stuff that these guys know. How am I possibly going to do this? But again, this is a regular guy who has a normal job, and he is prepared enough, and the information is out there so you can be prepared. And he also has the mindset to deal with the violence when it happened, unlike some of the people in his group. You mentioned at a gas station how the government had decided there was an executive order where the government and the emergency personnel were going to need fuel. Again, thinking about how people lose their minds over a sale for the holiday season, think about now they need to get fuel so they can get home to their families, and how violent they're going to be. And we see an example of that. Another example, yesterday was a busy day for me. I was in Park City, and when the power did come back on, I was in a nail salon. I was getting a pedicure. And a gal walks in and starts getting very animated with the staff there, unhappy with an experience she'd had there previously. And fortunately, they were able to get her to leave. But she could have come back. We never know what's going to happen at any given time when you're going to be in a situation. And before the show, I was mentioning to you when I lived in California, gee, do I want to bring my firearm with me? I'm just getting a haircut. I did put it in my purse. Yes, I was breaking the law. You're not going to get a concealed carry permit in California. That very same day, a shooter went into a salon and shot up the place, the girlfriend worked there and some of the other workers. You just never know. So always be prepared. So we have real life examples that show what we're reading about in these books can apply to us. Jim was prepared. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you were talking about mindset, that, that mindset is about overcoming your normalcy bias, because when you went in that salon, like most people, you would expect that things were going to be normal. You would expect that everybody in there was going to behave in the way that they should behave. But part of developing a survival mindset and a preparedness mindset is trying to be aware that normalcy bias influences you. You expect that things are going to be normal, that they're going to be the same as they were yesterday, but that's not always the case. You have to, and that's part of what these books do, is they prepare you to see that at any moment things can go sideways, they can go south, and you just have to be prepared to roll with that.
You know, when you mention normalcy bias, I have two events in mind that illustrate that perfectly. These are both music events. The most recent that we can remember is the shooting in Las Vegas, where people assumed it was part of the fireworks, and then the people running the event turned all the lights on, and all that managed to do was illuminate the targets even better. The other was a while back, and that was a fire when a band called Great White was playing back east. And even though the walls are on fire, people were thinking this is just part of the show and pyrotechnics. And I think 100 people lost their lives as a result of it. You're giving away 2 books today. We're going to ask a question. The question is that will get you a signed copy of one of Franklin's books. Name the trail that Jim and his group must traverse and get through to get home safely to their families. We'll ask that question again later on. So back to that topic, let's also bring up Locker 9. I thought that book was fantastic. That's not a part of the Borrowed World series, but it's a scenario. I got to tell you, somebody had asked me, Franklin, hey, my daughter, this guy lives in Atlanta. My daughter's in law school in San Diego. I am terrified for her. What can I do to keep her safe when I can't get to her? I sent him a link to Locker 9.
Excellent.
It's a very extravagant plan, but and maybe not everybody will think about that, but let's talk about that a little bit, because so many people can relate with their kids going off to college. Let's talk about that a little.
Yeah, where that book came from was after I wrote The Borrowed World, I started doing some preparedness events. And I was at an event in North Carolina, and people who had read the book kept coming up to me and saying, yeah, I enjoy a book about what I should do, but what really scares me is my daughter who's going to college, or my son and his family who live 2 towns away, or, just people that are separated from the main core of the family. So I decided to take that same situation and write a book about it. And Locker 9 came about because I took the same terror attack, the same event that The Borrowed World was set in, and I just put a different group of characters in the same event. And it's about a dad who was a little paranoid, and I just tried to take myself and say, okay, what would I do if my daughter was going to college 500 miles away? And I set an extreme, like you said, a very extravagant plan in place. But the basics of that plan were to teach people how they might be able to do this, even if they don't do the whole thing, how they might be able to take little pieces. Like one of the things that it talks a lot about is using the current connections you have, social media, work, family, high school friends, whatever, to build a safety network between where that person is and where you want them to be, about building safe house relationships. And just calling people and saying, hey, my daughter, if anything crazy ever happens and she's passing through your town, would you put her up for the night? Just little things like that. And it may seem paranoid, but, you know, better to be safe than sorry.
You know, you use that word paranoid. I've heard that before as well. And people will mock us and think, well, you know, I'll just get what I need to get when everything goes south. But depending on how quickly or how badly it goes south, you might not be able to. For instance, look at the ice storms back in Maryland. That's in your neck of the woods out there, not too far away. I remember this was one of the inspirations I had. We know that there are going to be storms. We know about the weather. That's entirely predictable. But there was one where people were just caught flat-footed, and you saw it took over the news, where they're waiting in line for water, for generators, for government assistance. You have to remember how overtaxed the government can get. And because of physical barriers, power lines down, that sort of thing from the ice, they might not be able to get to you or you to them. And that's something you have to consider as well. I love the premise of a network, and you can utilize social media. Now, this weekend I'm leaving on a trip. I have a gal, she lives in South Carolina, and every year or so we like to get together and meet and find a place between us and go exploring. And for the first time after reading your book, I said, hey, Mary, tell me when you're leaving, and then keep in touch with me, how you're progressing. She gave me her route, where she's going. I said, if anything happens, let me know. I will reach out. I'm sure I will have some people in the area that can help you. This is something we can do every day.
Yeah, and now is the time to do that, when we have the ability to communicate so easily with people, because there may be a point when those communication systems aren't available. And one of the little inside jokes, it's not necessarily a joke, but a little inside reference in the book is that, you know, if it's a prepper friend that you have in that network who you know has good resources, they refer to those as gold star friends. So, you know, since writing these books, I get messages from people all the time saying, you know, if you're ever, you know, in Oklahoma, you have a gold star in, you know, this city or this town or whatever. So I save all that information, because you never know when you're going to need to call on one of those gold star people.
You know, that is such an overlooked aspect of preparedness. And I'm going to give you credit for that, because I really didn't think of this until I read Locker 9. The closest I had come was my son was driving my motorhome and his go-kart, taking a trailer behind him from my house, which is east of Salt Lake City, about an hour and a half, to west of Salt Lake City. So we had to go through a major area to get to the racetrack. And there was a big fire, and it was interfering with the freeway. So I had him get off, and it looked like there were explosions. This is by the airport. There's a lot of stuff out there. And I said, look, if you have an issue, contact so-and-so. And I just tagged him in a post. That guy was on immediately. And he was actually a friend of mine who's the commander of the Tooele County Lightfoot Militia. So it's really important to have friendlies in every area, and think about that ahead of time. And I'm actually going to start incorporating that concept into our discussion in our show. And you will absolutely, and Locker 9, be credited with that, because this is about building a network. We talk about building a network, people in your community, but I really hadn't thought of branching out and making it so people know how to get home when they're farther away, and relying on friends, particularly when we have the access and the communication now. Because as we know, Franklin, when is the time to prepare?
Now.
Yeah, before we need to. And the other thing that was very crucial in your books, as we go through, and, you know, we can, it's not a spoiler to say Jim makes it home to his family, because for crying out loud, we're in the 6th book.
Right, yeah.
But we also learn by reading the series that not only can you not always rely on government, often through no fault of their own, but sometimes we have to remember these emergency personnel, law enforcement officers in particular, they're human beings just like us. They are susceptible to the same flaws that we have, meaning they're going to have their own families that they want to take to. And just like other members of society who can kind of switch and become opportunistic and take advantage of the weaknesses of others. Law enforcement personnel are no different from that. We see this issue in the book. You have to also consider who's in your neighborhood, who's around that might be a threat. Again, I'm not trying to make certain groups feel unpopular here, but you do have a trailer park, for instance. You can have government housing where people are used to relying on government, just like they were in this park. They're not prepared because they take advantage of a system that provides for them. And then when that stops, that, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, then they can become a threat. I'm going to let you finish up. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, to give a little shout out to my friend Sam Culper, who does the Forward Observer newsletter. I've taken some of his classes, and a lot of what he talks about, I've integrated into some of the things that I do in the classes I teach based on Locker 9. And one of the things he talks about is treat the area where you live like it's an area of operation in a war zone. You basically need to use the resources you have now to be gathering intelligence on where you live. You need an area of operations binder where you print little Google maps that, make note of where halfway houses are, where correctional centers are, where things that are resources to you are, because there may be a time when Google Maps is not available, but if you can print those topo maps now and you can mark those things and you can list resources. One thing I've even mentioned to people is print your sex offender registry now, because there may be a time when you can't access that and you want to know who those people are in your community if things go south.
That's absolutely brilliant, and something I will admit I had not really thought of. But we do take it. We take for granted the continuing availability of this information vis-a-vis our cell phones or our computers. And I have, because I have traveled all around this continental landmass in my motorhome, I have an atlas. You can get them big Walmart atlases. And the thing about the Walmart atlases, they also show where the Walmarts are. So you can find some places for supplies, while you still might be able to do so. But again, that's part of situational awareness, which is crucial for survival, knowing who, what, where, what's around you, how you can get from point A to point B. Again, we're going to ask the question, what is the trail that Jim and his coworkers must take so they can get home safely to their families? Send me a direct message on Facebook Messenger. I will get it. Even if you're not a friend of mine, I will go to my requests and you will get a copy of Borrowed World or Locker 9. Signed, by the way. Franklin, how can people follow you? How can they order your books? What classes do you teach? Let's wrap that up so people can know where to get more.
The easiest way to track me down is my website, which is franklinhorton.com. My books are exclusive to Amazon. So if you get on Amazon, you can buy the ebook or the paperback. I have 9 books out now, so that gives you a little to work through. The books are also available on Audible and iTunes. So if you prefer an audiobook, if you're a person who's on the road a lot and you want somebody to read the book to you, we can cover that too. So as far as classes go, there are certain events that I go to when I can. Right now, most of them are regional, but I've taught several classes on Locker 9, and that's something I enjoy doing. So I hope to teach more of those as we move along.
Okay, I have books 1 through
Suzanne. Can I ask a question?
I have books 1 through 6 and Locker 9. What are the 2 I'm missing?
I have a book called Random Acts that is about social media and the dangers of social media.
Oh, okay. We'll have you back on. And what's the other one?
There's 2 in Locker 9, 6 in the Borrowed World, and then Random Acts.
Oh, okay. So I need the Locker 9 sequel. Go ahead, Jeff, and then we're going to wrap up.
That's what I was going to ask. When's book 3 coming out? I'm sitting here waiting on bated breath.
I am hoping that before the year is out, I will have 2 more books out, and one of those will be the sequel to Locker 9.
All right. Well, I'm going to be getting that one. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, that's it. That's all I wanted to know. I just wanted to know because I'm waiting to find out what happens with those guys.
Yeah, you'll hopefully know by Christmas.
Franklin Horton, I want to thank you for coming on. One of my favorite post-APOC authors. Love your books. We're going to have you back on again. This episode will be available for download on SoundCloud. I want to remind you all to listen. The Mark and Suzanne Show, Revolutionizing Radio, returns tomorrow. That will be at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight on the Cerberus Radio Network. I'm Suzanne Sherman. This has been the Wasatch Report. Jeff Johnson producing. Franklin Horton is my guest here on the Cerberus Radio Network, defending freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny.
She walked out of the grocery store just the other day. She saw my flag waving in the wind and said, "Throw that trash away." I said, "Ma'am, I am a Christian man and I believe American pride. That flag's gonna stay right where it is, and here's my reason why." Granddaddy fought at Bellawood and my uncle at Normandy. And their blood ran through my daddy's veins, and that blood still runs through me. My family's all stood ready when the wolf drowned at the door. So when you curse that flag, you curse their names, and still come back for more. You can say